maybe for more on this. Now, some see the decision to republish the cartoons as a gesture in defense of free speech, others as another provocation and an attack on religion. What's your view?
As war or civil war has fortunately not yet been declared between these two camps, I think that we can take the time to reflect, to dialogue in mutual respect, and the struggle that is worth fighting for, I think, is that for secularism. That means the right of all to express themselves and to believe or not to believe what they want in the respect and tolerance of others. And the French have never been greater and more respected people than during the Enlightenment. And then came, as a result of this and of the French Revolution, then came the 1905 law of the separation of all churches and state. And this separation can only work in mutual respect of all believers, but also of all non-believers. And this does not happen through caricature, but through culture.
So this trial that's just got underway is supposed to bring some sort of closure to this tragedy that's now taken place 5 years ago. Could republishing the cartoons somehow undermine that process, or is it more of a bookend?
Yes, after these horrible attacks, there was such a reaction of horror that some people have lost their heads, which unfortunately is a tribute to the politics of terror. But for example, there was a fashionable journalist who said at this moment, "Those who are not Charlie must be punished." But I'm sorry, but just because I find these attacks horrible doesn't mean that I have to identify myself with the newspapers whose political line I have never appreciated, especially from their neo-conservative turn in the late 19th, at the time of the NATO bombings against Serbia, for instance. And before these attacks, therefore, at a time when criticism was still possible, some people pointed to the fact that the Muslims in France in Charlie Hebdo were systematically attacked with a rage reminiscent of that against the Jews during the interwar period. And we know where this hatred and contempt have led. And the worst thing in France would be if, in the name of defending freedom of expression, freedom of speech, we allowed ourselves to be drawn into a war of civilization, which would claim ever more victims, can assure you.
This has been labeled a landmark trial. Do you agree with that? And if so, in what sense is it landmark?
I don't think a lot happens in this legal field. The French are not threatened in their way of life. And they showed, for instance, that during the Nazi occupation, that if they were threatened in their way of life, they were ready to fight to the death to defend themselves. It's okay. On the other hand, yes, there is a moderate but real risk of an inter-ethnic civil war in France. It is a non-immediate but plausible threat, and it would be better if the tensions were to diminish.
You're in Paris right now. Do you feel that France is a safer country now compared to 2015?
Oh, the French people may be safer since the disappearance of ISIS, but I think we need an uncompromising assessment of the previous period when we suffered the terrorist attacks, and where, in spite of that, our foreign minister at the same time dared to say that an Islamist militia was doing a great job against Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And I think that France must stop aligning itself with the American imperialist policy of destruction of the Arab world. France must find allies, or refine allies in the Arab world, secular if possible, but in any case, this does not mean exacerbating the conflict of civilizations. And France must rediscover its great Arab policy of the past, which constituted a counter-alliance against its close neighbors, following the example of the counter-alliance it had maintained with Russia to protect itself in the past against Germany. A country does not choose its geopolitics. And I think that France cannot afford the luxury of both Rubophobia and Russophobia. It's too much. It is simply contrary to our interests.
We've been speaking with French publisher and journalist Aymeric Monville. Thank you for your time and your comments.